Hi there. Welcome to NapTime History channel. Tonight we're tiptoeing through the perfumed halls of Versailles, where silk stockings rustle against marble floors, and in every shadow hides a scandal that would make your grandmother faint into her tea. You stand in the Hall of Mirrors at midnight, watching candlelight flicker across 1,000 reflections of debauchery. And honestly, you probably won't make it through these stories without clutching your pearls at least once, even if you don't own pearls. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love knowing who's falling asleep to French court scandals at 3 a.m. in Tokyo or midnight in Manchester. All right, let's begin the story. You push through the heavy velvet curtains of time and find yourself in 1682 when Louis XIV transforms a humble hunting lodge into the most magnificent and morally questionable palace Europe has ever seen. The air tastes of lavender water and lies, and in everywhere you look, aristocrats glide past in clouds of powder and perfume, their faces painted white as death masks. You're watching the birth of Versailles as the epicenter of French power. But more importantly, you're witnessing the creation of history's most elaborate stage for sexual intrigue. The palace sprawls before you like a golden monster with 1,000 rooms, each one a potential setting for scandal. You count 27 different types of chairs in the king's apartment alone. Historians still argue whether the number had erotic symbolism or just reflected Louis's furniture obsession. The mainstream history books tell you Versailles cost 600 million livres to build, but they whisper less about the hidden passages constructed specifically for midnight liaisons, or the fact that courtiers regularly relieved themselves in hallway corners because they couldn't find the inadequate number of toilets. Talk about setting the mood. You follow a duchess through the marble halls, her train sweeping across floors that servants scrub with wine to make them shine. She's heading to one of the 300 private apartments where the real business of court happens after dark. These chambers, you discover, operate on an unspoken points system. Get close enough to the king's bedchamber, and you might catch his eye during the ceremonial morning dressing. Fall out of favor, and you're exiled to the drafty north wing, where the walls literally weep with condensation and your romantic prospects freeze faster than champagne in a January fountain. You notice how every surface at Versailles serves double duty. Those mirrors aren't just for admiring your ridiculous wig. They're strategically angled so you can watch who enters whose apartment at compromising hours. The gardens, with their 10,000 trees imported from across France, create perfect leafy alcoves for affairs. Even the fountains, which require more water than the entire city of Paris uses, mask the sounds of intimate conversations and other activities. A courtier leans close and mentions that the Apollo fountain alone has witnessed more proposals, decent and indecent, than any priest in France. The corridors echo with whispers about the Sun King's greatest secret, and you lean closer to catch the gossip that even now, centuries later, makes historians blush into their dusty archives. You're standing outside the royal chapel In 1683, watching Louis XIV exchange glances with a woman who shouldn't be there, Madame de Maintenon, the governess who somehow captured the most powerful man in Europe. She's 48, he's 45, and in a court that prizes teenage mistresses like collectible porcelain, their romance reads like a scandal wrapped in a miracle. You follow the trail of their relationship through palace bedrooms and private studies, discovering that this isn't just another royal affair. After Queen Marie-Thérèse dies, conveniently, some whisper, though historians still argue whether the timing was natural or helped along, Louis does the unthinkable. He marries Maintenon in a secret ceremony so hush-hush that servants who witnessed it suddenly found themselves reassigned to France's least pleasant colonies. The Pope himself refuses to acknowledge it, which in Catholic France is rather like trying to pretend the sun doesn't exist while standing in daylight. But here's where your proper history teacher definitely skipped a chapter. Madame de Maintenon, this supposedly pious woman who draped Versailles in a blanket of religious propriety, commissioned as some of the raciest educational materials of the age. You stumble upon her private library and discover illustrated manuals that would make a modern sex therapist raise an eyebrow. These aren't your typical lie back and think of France guides. They're detailed instructions on pleasure, complete with anatomical drawings that show more enthusiasm than accuracy. She believed young noblewomen needed proper bedroom education before marriage, arguing that ignorance led to sin. The church disagreed, but then again, the church disagreed with most things that involved anyone enjoying themselves. You watch as Maintenon transforms the court's sexual culture from the inside out, like a velvet revolution in the bedroom, where Louis's previous mistresses flaunted their bodies in see-through gowns. She covers up in high-necked black silk and somehow becomes more powerful than any half-naked duchess. Courtiers joke that she conquered the king with her conversation and then kept him with techniques learned from those scandalous manuals. One particularly catty countess writes that Maintenon raised the king's spirits among other things, which is about as subtle as French court gossip ever gets. The marriage creates a peculiar dynamic at Versailles. Officially, Maintenon doesn't exist as queen. She can't sit in the royal pew at chapel or sign official documents. Unofficially, she controls access to the king more tightly than any guard. You want a patent of nobility? Better make friends with Maintenon first. Need a military commission for your useless son? Hope you've been saying nice things about her educational reforms. She operates from the shadows, running a parallel court where moral instruction and political power intertwine like lovers in a garden maze. You discover her apartments, modest by Versailles standards, but strategically located. Unlike other royal favorites who demanded golden everything, she chooses dark wood and simple furnishings, except for her bed, which features hidden compartments rumored to contain everything from state secrets to those in infamous manuals. Servants report strange noises at night, not the expected sounds of passion, but the scratch of quills on parchment as she and Louis work on state papers by candlelight. Apparently, nothing sets the mood quite like tax reform. You slip into a darkened salon where the air hangs thick with incense and fear, watching aristocrats huddle around a woman who claims she can read the future in chicken entrails, though tonight she's offering something far more sinister than fortune telling. Welcome to 1679, when the affair of the poisons grips Versailles like a beautifully manicured hand around a throat. The scandal starts small, just a few mysterious deaths among the nobility. But soon you're witnessing a web of corruption that reaches from back alley abortionists all the way to the king's own bed. The fortune teller before you goes by La Voisin, and her client list reads like a who's who of French high society. She doesn't just peddle tarot cards and palm readings. She's running a full-service poisoning consultancy out of her house on the outskirts of Paris. You peek at her order book and find aphrodisiac powders made from Spanish fly and menstrual blood. Charming. Inheritance powders that ensure wealthy husbands develop sudden stomach complaints, and love potions that supposedly contain bits of dried moles and bat blood. The prices are astronomical, but then again, murder has always been a luxury good. You follow one of her regular clients, the Marquise de Brinvilliers, as she tests her latest purchase on hospital patients. She volunteers at the charity ward. You see, out of the goodness of her heart and the convenience of having expendable test subjects, she takes notes like a proper scientist, documenting how long each poison takes to work and whether the victims suffer prettily enough to avoid suspicion. Modern historians still argue whether she killed her father and two brothers for their inheritance or just for practice, though the distinction seems rather academic when you're watching her sprinkle arsenic into their wine like a demented sommelier. The scandal explodes when Madame de Montespan, the king's official mistress, gets caught up in the investigation. You creep into one of the black masses held in La Voisin's garden, where naked aristocrats sprawl across makeshift altars while defrocked priests mumble Latin backwards. The mainstream history focuses on the theatrical Satanism, but you notice the real scandal. These aren't devil worshippers so much as desperate courtiers trying to maintain their positions through any means necessary. Montespan allegedly participated in rituals where infants' blood was mixed into love potions meant for the king, though some scholars argue the babies were already dead from natural causes, as if that somehow makes it better. You watch the trials unfold in the specially created Chambre Ardente, the burning court, where judges wear black robes and interrogate suspects by candlelight for maximum dramatic effect. The testimonies read like perverted fairy tales, nobles purchasing powders to increase sexual stamina, to decrease rivals' fertility, to cause impotence in unwanted suitors. One duchess admits to slipping her husband a potion made from dried toads and mercury because he snored. Another confesses to buying the cursed candles that would make her lover think only of her. Side effects included mild hallucinations and chronic diarrhea, which somewhat defeated the romantic purpose. The king, horrified that his own mistress might have tried to poison him with love, or worse, shuts down the investigation just as it threatens to implicate half the court. You count the casualties, 36 executions, including La Voisin herself, burned alive while the crowd sells souvenirs. Countless more aristocrats flee to convents or convenient exile. The fortune tellers and poisoners who survive simply rebrand themselves as herbalists and midwives, because the market for deadly assistance never really disappears. It just puts on a medical coat. You stumble into a candlelit ballroom where men in elaborate gowns twirl past, their painted faces more carefully made up than any duchess, and realize you've crashed one of Monsieur Philippe's legendary soirees. The Duke of Orleans, brother to the Sun King, presides over the festivities in a pink silk dress embroidered with pearls, his high heels clicking against marble as he critiques everyone's rouge application. In a court where even heterosexual affairs follow strict protocols, Philippe's flamboyant homosexuality operates like a glitter bomb thrown into a formal dinner party. The mainstream histories call him effeminate and leave it at that. But you're watching something far more radical, a prince who refuses to closet himself in an era when sodomy is technically punishable by burning. Philippe doesn't just have male lovers. He parades them through Versailles like prize poodles, draping them in diamonds and making them duchesses in all but title. His current favorite, the Chevalier de Lorraine, lounges on a silk divan wearing more makeup than a kabuki performer, feeding Philippe grapes while courtiers pretend not to notice their intertwined legs. You follow Philippe through his daily routine, which involves more costume changes than a Broadway production. Morning, a hunting outfit with a decidedly non-masculine pink jacket. Afternoon, a military uniform altered to include lace cuffs that would entangle in any actual sword fight. Evening, full drag that would make RuPaul weep with envy. Historians still argue whether his cross-dressing was personal preference or political performance, a way to appear less threatening to his paranoid brother. But watching him fuss over his wig collection, 73 at last count, you suspect he just really likes pretty things. The king tolerates his brother's behavior with the resigned air of someone who's given up trying to train a particularly fabulous cat. Louis even arranges Philippe's marriages, 2 of them, to appropriately fertile women who understand their job is to produce heirs and then politely look the other way. Philippe's first wife, Henriette, writes letters complaining that her husband spends more time choosing her dresses than touching her, though she admits his fashion sense is impeccable. She dies young under mysterious circumstances, and tongues wag that the Chevalier de Lorraine poisoned her for trying to limit his influence. Philippe mourns by commissioning a stunning black ball gown. You discover Philippe's private apartments, which look like Liberace's fever dream. Mirrors everywhere, ceiling included. Furniture upholstered in pink velvet, and a bed large enough to accommodate what one courtier delicately calls group activities. His parties become legendary safe spaces where the usual rules don't apply. Noble boys who'd be disowned for such behavior elsewhere dance freely with their lovers, and even straight courtiers experiment with makeup and corsets. It's like Versailles' own underground queer club, if underground queer clubs had champagne fountains and lute players. But here's the delicious irony you uncover in the archives. Philippe, despite spending battles applying rouge instead of fighting, proves himself a brilliant military commander. He wins crucial victories at Castle and Mons, leading charges in full makeup and high heels, which must have confused the hell out of enemy forces. His lovers follow him to war like a fabulous entourage, and soldiers joke that the Duke's tent contains more perfume than gunpowder, yet they follow him loyally. Turns out being led by a drama queen in diamonds beats being led by a boring straight guy who gets you killed. You hear giggles echoing through the trees and follow the sound to a discreet mansion tucked into the forests near Versailles, where carriages arrive at all hours carrying young girls who won't leave the same way they entered. This is the Parc aux Cerfs, Louis XV's private brothel disguised as a charming country retreat, and you're about to witness one of the most systematically perverted operations in royal history. The name means deer park, which sounds almost whimsical until you realize the deer being hunted are teenagers, some as young as 14. The operation runs with bureaucratic efficiency that would impress a modern corporation if modern corporations specialized in child trafficking. You shadow Madame de Pompadour, the king's chief mistress, as she personally oversees the recruitment process. Girls are selected from poor families, purchased like livestock with promises of dowries and positions at court. They're told they'll be serving a minor nobleman, never knowing their client is the King of France until they're already installed in the house. The lucky ones leave pregnant with royal bastards and decent pensions. The unlucky ones just leave pregnant. You rifle through the account books and find expenses that make your stomach turn. For the education of new girls in dancing and conversation, because apparently statutory rape requires cultured victims. Medical examinations to ensure purity, conducted monthly by royal physicians who should have their licenses revoked, and compensation for families, listed between expenses for chocolate and candles. The budget rivals that of a small army, which is what critics call it, Louis's Army of Venus, though Venus herself would probably file a restraining order. Inside the house, you discover rooms decorated like a pedophile's Pinterest board, all pink silk and baby blue ribbons, with beds shaped like seashells and mirrors positioned at angles that would make a pornographer blush. The girls receive training in music, poetry, and other arts, which the instructors detail in manuals that should be evidence in a criminal trial. One former resident, Louise O'Murphy, gets immortalized in a painting lying naked on a daybed, looking all of 15 years old. The painting hangs in the royal collection, and courtiers admire it at dinner parties like it's not literally evidence of a crime. You watch Louis XV arrive for his visits, a man in his 50s creeping through his own secret entrance like a vampire who's lost his dignity along with his morals. He maintains elaborate pretenses with each girl, sometimes pretending to be a Polish count, sometimes a wealthy merchant. The girls play along because what choice do they have? Historians still argue whether they were well-treated prisoners or willing participants, which misses the point that children can't consent to being royal sex toys, no matter how nice the accommodations. Madame de Pompadour manages this whole sick enterprise with the efficiency of a CEO, keeping detailed records of each girl's performance and special talents. You find her notes rating girls on their conversation skills, their musical abilities, and other qualities described in euphemisms that fool no one. She even arranges marriages for the retired girls, paying off minor nobles to take used goods off the royal hands, It's human resources management at its most inhuman, and she does it all while maintaining her position as the king's official companion and one of the most powerful women in France. The Deer Park operates for over a decade, processing an estimated 30 to 60 girls through its doors. The exact number remains disputed because, surprise, people involved in child sex trafficking don't keep great records for posterity. What you do find in the archives are payment receipts, medical reports documenting pregnancies and treatments for various diseases, and letters from desperate mothers asking after daughters who've disappeared into the King's Forest Playhouse. You push open the doors to Madame de Pompadour's private apartments and immediately understand why she remained Louis XV's most powerful mistress for 2 decades, despite, or perhaps because of, rarely sleeping with him after the first few years. Her boudoir spreads before you like an erotic art gallery crossed with a political war room, where every piece of furniture doubles as a weapon of seduction or statecraft. That innocent-looking writing desk? Pull the secret lever and it transforms into a daybed, complete with stirrups. The decorative shepherdess statue? Twist her crook and watch her clothes fall away in a miniature striptease. Pompadour, born Jean Antoinette Poisson, literally fish, which the court snobs never let her forget, engineered her rise to power like a military campaign. You find her teenage diary, where she writes about a fortune teller's prediction that she'd capture a king's heart, though the fortune teller was probably her mother, who'd been grooming her for royal mistressdom since she could walk. By the time she accidentally drops her handkerchief in front of Louis at a masked ball, she's trained in singing, dancing, acting, and what one instructor delicately calls the art of strategic undress. You examine her infamous mechanical furniture, masterpieces of 18th century engineering designed to make acrobatic sex possible for a king with increasingly lazy tendencies. There's a chair that adjusts to 14 different positions with the turn of a crank, a table with hidden compartments containing what appear to be ivory instruments of pleasure, and a bed with a pulley system that does the work so Louis doesn't have to. The craftsman's bills list these items as furniture for relaxation, which is technically true if you define relaxation very creatively. But here's what your high school history teacher definitely didn't mention. Pompadour commissioned some of the age's most explicit erotic art, disguised as mythological scenes. You study her collection, where Zeus doesn't just transform into a swan to seduce Leda. He performs acts that would violate several obscenity laws and possibly some laws of physics. She hangs these paintings in her official reception rooms, where ambassadors conduct diplomatic meetings while trying not to stare at Venus doing things with Mars that have nothing to do with war. One English diplomat writes home that negotiating treaties at Pompadour's felt like conducting business in a brothel run by intellectuals. You discover her real genius lay in transforming sexual power into political influence. When Louis grows bored with her body, she privately complains of his excessive demands and her own cold temperament. She doesn't fade away like discarded mistresses before her. Instead, she procures other women for him, remember that Deer Park, while maintaining her position as his closest advisor and friend. She controls access to the king more effectively than any guard, runs a spy network that rivals the official secret police, and influences policy decisions between arranging orgies. Historians still argue whether she was a feminist icon or a calculating madame. Watching her work, you realize she was both. Her apartment includes a secret room where she keeps what she calls her influence files, detailed records on every courtier's sexual preferences, financial vulnerabilities, and embarrassing secrets. This duke likes to be whipped by women dressed as nuns? Noted. That Cardinal has gambling debts and a pregnant mistress? Filed for future use. She operates like a combination CIA director and madam, using information as currency and sex as a weapon of mass distraction. When a rival tries to undermine her position, their deepest secrets mysteriously become dinner party gossip. You find yourself in a jeweler's workshop in 1785, watching craftsmen put finishing touches on a necklace so obscenely expensive it could fund a small war, and you're about to witness the scandal that helped destroy a queen. The necklace contains 647 diamonds weighing 2,800 carats, arranged in festoons and tassels that drape like a sparkling breastplate of poor financial decisions. Originally commissioned for Madame du Barry, Louis XV's last mistress, it's now being peddled to Marie Antoinette, who has already rejected it twice because even she, queen of overspending, thinks it's too much. Enter Jeanne de Valois Saint-Remy, a con artist with a name longer than her legitimate ancestry, who claims to be descended from royal bastards and therefore entitled to, well, everything. You watch her weave a scheme so audacious that Netflix would reject it as unrealistic. She convinces Cardinal de Rohan, a man so desperately horny for royal approval he'd believe Marie Antoinette was secretly in love with him if you wrote it in crayon, that the queen wants the necklace but needs him to secretly negotiate the purchase. Why secretly? Because of reasons too complicated and sexy to explain. Obviously, the cardinal, whose critical thinking skills apparently died with his last brain cell, agrees to meet the queen for midnight rendezvous in the Grove of Venus at Versailles. You lurk in the shadows watching a prostitute named Nicole d'Oliva, hired because she vaguely resembles Marie Antoinette if you squint in the dark after several bottles of wine. Hand the cardinal a rose and whisper promises of future gratitude. The real queen, meanwhile, is probably in bed reading philosophy or playing cards, completely unaware that her reputation is being destroyed by a hooker in a cheap wig. You trace the forged letters between the cardinal and the queen, each one more ridiculous than the last. They're written in terrible French, with spelling errors that should have tipped off anyone who'd ever seen Marie Antoinette's actual correspondence. But the cardinal is thinking with organs that don't spell check. The letters progress from coy flirtation to promises of sexual favors that would make a courtesan blush. One particularly creative forgery has the queen promising to meet him wearing nothing but the diamond necklace, which historians still argue about, not whether it's real, it's obviously fake, but whether anyone could be stupid enough to believe it. The scheme unravels when the jewelers, not receiving their payment, approach the queen directly. You're present for that delightful moment When Marie Antoinette realizes she's being accused of soliciting jewelry through sexual promises to a cardinal she loathes. The explosion of royal fury could be heard in Austria. The cardinal gets arrested while conducting mass in full ceremonial robes, dragged from the altar like a bedazzled criminal. Jean flees, but gets captured, branded with a V for volus, thief, and publicly whipped while the crowd sells pamphlets describing the queen's supposed sexual depravity. The trial becomes a public sensation where every sordid detail gets aired like 18th century reality TV. The forged letters are read aloud in court, each fake promise of royal sexual favors adding another nail to Marie Antoinette's reputation coffin. The cardinal's lawyer argues his client was duped by love, painting him as a romantic fool rather than a horny idiot. The prostitute testifies about her role-playing, describing how she practiced the queen's walk and memorized phrases like, "You may hope," that meant absolutely nothing but sounded appropriately royal and vague. You slip through the gates of the Palais Royal as dusk falls in 1784, entering with Philippe d'Orléans' personal kingdom of vice, where absolutely anything goes if you have the coins to pay for it. This Philippe, great-grandson of the cross-dressing duke from earlier, has transformed his inherited palace into Paris's first shopping mall, except the shops sell more than ribbons and gloves. You count gambling dens, brothels, puppet shows featuring anatomically correct puppets, and cafes where revolutionaries plot the monarchy's downfall between ordering prostitutes and Prosecco. The gardens pulse with an energy that makes Versailles look like a convent. You dodge pickpockets, pimps, and philosophers, all mingling in a democratic chaos that would horrify the rank-obsessed court. Under the arcade's arches, nobility slums with commoners, their class distinctions dissolved by darkness and desire. A duchess haggles with a prostitute over prices, while her husband loses the family fortune at the roulette table upstairs. Nobody wears masks here. Anonymity comes from the sheer overwhelming debauchery that makes individual sins impossible to track. You discover the notorious boutiques on the upper floors, which sell everything from pornographic novels to dildos shaped like famous politicians. The Cardinal de Rohan model is particularly popular after that necklace fiasco. One shop specializes in English goods, a euphemism for condoms made from sheep intestines that cost more than a worker's weekly wage. Another offers instructional materials featuring engravings so explicit that customs officials at the border supposedly go blind trying to confiscate them all. The proprietor, a former priest, insists he's providing a public education service. Philippe himself presides over this carnival of corruption like a debauched CEO, taking a cut from every transaction while maintaining apartments where orgies run on a schedule more reliable than the Royal Mail. You attend one of his legendary parties where guests arrive naked except for masks, not for anonymity, but because clothes would just slow things down. The buffet table features aphrodisiac oysters arranged in suggestive patterns, champagne fountains that never run dry, and little cakes shaped like body parts that would make a baker blush. One historian claims these parties were political gatherings, which is technically true if you define politics as negotiating who goes on top. You watch aristocrats stumble from brothel to brotherhood meeting because the same arcade that houses Paris's most expensive courtesans also shelters its most radical thinkers. The cafes buzz with talk of equality and liberty, while upstairs, people pay extra to be tied up and called degrading names by professionals. It's here that revolution literally rubs shoulders with prostitution. Pamphlets calling for the king's head are sold next to ones advertising Marie Antoinette's secret diary, completely fictional but anatomically detailed. The police don't even try to maintain order, they just collect bribes and enjoy the shows. The Palais Royal operates as a 24-hour carnival where every vice has a price list and every desire finds a vendor. You stumble through rooms where women wrestle in mud for cheering crowds throwing coins, where men bid on virgins who are definitely not virgins, but play the part convincingly, where fortune tellers predict your sexual future using cards decorated with obscene images. One section features live sex shows advertised as classical tableaus. Apparently, adding a toga makes public fornication educational. The academics who frequent these shows claim they're studying ancient customs, though you notice they take very few notes. You tiptoe through Versailles at dawn, following servants who carry golden chamber pots like holy relics, and realize you're about to witness the most intimate and weirdly public ritual of royal life. The king's morning toilette unfolds like pornographic performance art, where Louis XVI sits on his velvet-cushioned close stool while dozens of courtiers watch him defecate. The highest nobles compete for the honor of handing him the cloth to wipe the royal posterior, a privilege that comes with political influence and probably therapy bills. The bathroom architecture at Versailles tells its own perverted story. You discover a network of hidden passages connecting bedchambers to private bathing rooms, though privacy is relative when servants, lovers, and occasionally lost tourists might pop out of secret doors at any moment. The Queen's bathroom features mirrors angled to provide views from every direction, not for vanity, but for security, because apparently assassination attempts are more likely when you're naked and vulnerable. Marie Antoinette takes hour-long baths in ass's milk mixed with rose petals, while courtiers gather to discuss politics and watch her float like a very expensive soup ingredient. You find the secret corridor system that connects royal apartments, designed for midnight wandering without encountering awkward spouses or servants. These passages hide voyeuristic peepholes drilled by enterprising courtiers who sell viewing slots to the highest bidder. One duchess maintains a profitable business, charging people to watch the Duc de Bourbon's weekly enema treatments, which he insists on taking while discussing military strategy. The Duke remains unaware that his bowel movements have become Thursday evening entertainment for half the court. The public nature of royal bathing reaches peak absurdity when you witness the Queen's monthly proof of menstruation. Yes, you read that right. Marie Antoinette must regularly display her bloodied linens to witnesses who verify she's not pregnant, because apparently the state of the royal uterus is everybody's business. These exhibitions happen in a room specifically designed for the purpose, with tiered seating like a medical theater. Courtiers attend with the same enthusiasm they'd bring to the opera, gossiping about flow heaviness and cycle regularity while the queen stands there wishing for the sweet release of death. You explore the notorious flying chair rooms, where early toilets sit on pulley systems that can be raised or lowered depending on the user's rank, because even taking a shit requires protocol at Versailles. The Comte de Buffon insists on having his chair elevated to maximum height, claiming it aids his philosophical thinking. Below him, lesser nobles queue for their turn, holding it in while maintaining pleasant conversation about the weather. One particularly unfortunate marquis suffers what court doctors call retention of dignity, a condition where you literally can't poop because someone more important might need the toilet. But here's where it gets truly bizarre. The king's bowel movements are recorded in official logs that historians still argue about. Did Louis XV really have chronic constipation that affected his foreign policy decisions? Did Louis XVI's digestive issues contribute to his political weakness? You flip through medical records that track royal excrement with more detail than modern fitness apps track steps, color, consistency, frequency. It's all there in nauseating detail, annotated by physicians who built entire careers on analyzing royal feces. One doctor gains nobility purely for correctly predicting the king's bathroom schedule, allowing courtiers to position themselves strategically for maximum political advantage. You peek over the shoulder of the Comte de Buffon, not the philosopher obsessed with elevated toilet seats, but his degenerate nephew who shares the name and none of the intellect, as he updates what might be history's most disturbing spreadsheet. His Register of Conquests spans 12 leather-bound volumes, each entry meticulously documenting sexual encounters with the detail of a tax collector auditing a brothel, date, time, location, partner's name, social rank, hair color, performance metrics, and what he calls notable variations from standard practice, which you really don't want to know about but can't help reading. The Comte treats seduction like other men treat butterfly collecting, except butterflies don't usually have husbands who might challenge you to duels. You follow him through a typical day of what he considers hunting. Morning. He attends Mass specifically to identify vulnerable wives praying for their husband's fidelity. The irony escapes him. Afternoon. He crashes garden parties to corner debutantes behind the hedges. Evening. The opera, where he maintains a private box less for watching performances than performing himself. Having installed a daybed behind curtains that don't muffle sound as well as he thinks. You read his scoring system with growing horror and fascination. Virgins earn maximum points, but he deducts for excessive crying or requirements of poetry. Married women score based on their husband's military rank. Cuckolding a general apparently counts double. He awards himself bonuses for locations, palace closets, confessional booths. That one seems especially hellbound. And once, memorably, during a funeral where he claims the widow needed immediate consolation. His marginalia includes helpful notes like, sister worth investigating, and mother still attractive, possible future project. The truly disturbing part isn't just the predatory behavior, it's the bureaucratic efficiency. He maintains cross-referenced indexes organized by physical attributes, social connections, and what he delicately terms accessibility factors. You discover his correspondence with other aristocratic perverts who trade information like baseball cards. I'll give you 2 blonde countesses for that red-headed ambassador's wife, reads one letter that makes you want to burn the entire archive. They even have a monthly newsletter, encrypted and circulated among gentlemen collectors, sharing techniques and warnings about angry husbands. You attend one of their meetings, held in a private room at the Palais Royal, because of course it is, where these self-styled Cavaliers of Venus compare statistics like the world's worst fantasy league. The Comte currently leads with 1,247 verified conquests, though his rivals dispute several entries. They argue whether paid encounters count. Consensus, only if you don't negotiate the price beforehand. Debate the point value of servants versus nobility, and maintain a betting pool on who'll bed the new Spanish ambassador's wife first. One member suggests creating medals for achievements like most virgins in a calendar year, and they seriously consider it. But karma comes for the Comte in the form of syphilis, which he documents with the same obsessive detail as his conquests. His medical diary chronicles the progression from minor mercury treatments to significant nasal collapse with clinical detachment. He continues adding to his register even as his body falls apart, noting encounters with women who presumably didn't look too closely at his disintegrating face in the candlelight. Historians still argue whether his final tally of 1,789 conquests is accurate or the fevered imagination of a syphilitic brain, though finding several women who independently corroborated their unfortunate presence in his ledgers suggests at least some truth to his accounting. You enter the Queen's dressing room, where Marie Antoinette sits before a table laden with enough cosmetics to stock a modern Sephora, though these products could actually kill you faster than a guillotine. Her face swings white as fresh parchment, achieved through a mixture of lead powder and vinegar that's slowly poisoning her from the outside in. Ladies in waiting flutter around, applying rouge made from crushed beetles and mercury, creating that fashionable fevered consumption look that says, "I'm dying beautifully." The beauty standards at Versailles operate on a principle of more is more until your face falls off. You watch aristocrats apply foundation so thick it cracks when they smile, which explains why courtiers perfect that dead-eyed stare. The lead-based ceruse doesn't just give you that coveted corpse-like pallor, it causes skin to gray and sag, requiring more powder to cover the damage in an endless cycle of toxic vanity. One duchess jokes that she needs a trowel rather than a powder puff, though the joke loses humor when you notice her hairline has receded 3 inches from chemical burns. You examine the rouge pots, finding ingredients that read like a witch's shopping list. Cinnabar, that's mercury sulfide for those keeping track, carmine from crushed insects, and something mysteriously labeled virgin's blood that's probably just beet juice but sells for triple the price. Women paint their lips with fucus, a concoction containing lead and vinegar that makes kisses literally toxic. The Comtesse de Noailles loses all feeling in her lips after years of application, which she considers a blessing since she no longer has to feel her elderly husband's advances. But here's where the erotic meets the poisonous. These deadly cosmetics become part of elaborate seduction rituals. You discover the toilette of Venus, where select admirers watch noble ladies apply their makeup in performances that are somehow both boring and arousing. Men pay fortunes to observe the transformation from human to painted doll, finding excitement in watching women slowly poison themselves for beauty. The Duchesse de Polignac turns her daily face painting into ticketed events, complete with commentary on each product's origin and effects. "This powder comes from Venice," she announces, dabbing lead on her cheeks, "where courtesans use it to hide the pox." The audience applauds like she's revealed the secret of eternal youth rather than a recipe for brain damage. You stumble upon the underground beauty market where desperate courtiers buy increasingly dangerous products. There's eau de Ninon, supposedly containing the preserved essence of a famously beautiful courtesan, actually just alcohol and arsenic. Persian Dreams promises to tighten aging skin using a paste that turns out to be mostly lime and pigeon droppings. One vendor sells milk of roses that he claims comes from virgins bathing in rose petals, but definitely comes from his basement, where he mixes chalk and rancid fat. Women apply these concoctions, knowing they are probably toxic, because the alternative is facing court without the mask of makeup that everyone's agreed to pretend is beauty. The most disturbing discovery is the beauty death records kept by court physicians, documenting ladies who've literally poisoned themselves pretty. The Marquise de Créquy dies at 32 with silver blue skin from lead accumulation. The Comtesse de Sabran's jaw rots away from mercury exposure, requiring a painted leather prosthetic that fools no one but maintains the illusion. Young girls arrive at court fresh-faced and leave 5 years later looking like preserved corpses, their beauty dissolved by the very products meant to enhance it. Yet the practice continues, because in Versailles, it's better to die beautiful than live ugly. You hide behind a tapestry in the Queen's private apartments, watching Marie Antoinette pace like a caged bird, while Count Axel von Fersen, tall, Swedish, and devastating in his uniform, tries to maintain a respectful distance that shrinks with every whispered endearment. Their affair remains one of history's worst-kept secrets, conducted through coded letters, midnight carriage rides, and a series of coincidental meetings that fool absolutely no one, except possibly Louis XVI, who seems relieved someone else is handling his marital duties. The letters between them read like a romance novel written by someone with a military encryption handbook. Fersen writes about the concert when he means their lovemaking, discussing music when planning rendezvous, and trading sheet music for, well, you can guess. Marie Antoinette responds with her own coded passionate declarations hidden between discussions of weather and furniture arrangements. "The chairs in my blue salon need rearranging" means "meet me there at midnight," while "I find the Swedish climate agreeable" doesn't refer to meteorology. Court cryptographers work overtime, pretending they can't decode messages that a child could crack. You follow their most audacious encounters, like the time Fersen disguises himself as a coachman to drive the Queen to a secret assignation at the Petit Trianon. Every guard they pass recognizes him. It's hard to miss a 6-foot Swedish aristocrat, no matter how much you slouch, but they all develop convenient blindness. The queen emerges hours later with her hair mysteriously disheveled, despite spending the evening alone reading agricultural treaties. Fersen maintains the coachman disguise, while obviously wearing cologne that costs more than an actual coachman's yearly salary. The physical evidence of their affair creates its own problems. You discover the Queen's personal physician's notes, documenting suspicious bruises, consistent with passionate embracing, and prescribing remedies for exhaustion from excessive nighttime activities. The laundresses gossip about stains on sheets that definitely don't come from spilled wine, while seamstresses wonder why the Queen needs so many replacement corset strings. One particularly observant maid notes that the Queen's bed curtains show wear patterns suggesting vigorous movement by two bodies of significantly different weights, practically a signed confession in fabric form. But here's where politics and passion collide catastrophically. Fersen doesn't just warm the Queen's bed, he influences her political decisions. You read his letters advising her on everything from military appointments to responses to revolutionary threats, essentially making Swedish Dick the unofficial foreign policy advisor to France. He encourages her resistance to reform, convinces her the nobility will save them, and helps plan their disastrous flight to Varennes, which fails partly because they stop for sex breaks in a carriage too ornate to be inconspicuous. Revolutionary pamphlets gleefully report every detail, real and imagined, with illustrations that make modern tabloids look restrained. The propaganda war around their affair reaches grotesque proportions. You collect pamphlets showing the Queen in positions that would require circus training, servicing lines of men, including Fersen, her brother-in-law, and occasionally farm animals for variety. One particularly creative libel has her hosting orgies where admission is paid in French military secrets, essentially fucking away national security. The fact that she's actually only fucking one Swedish count gets lost in the pornographic imagination of revolutionary writers who understand that sexual scandal sells better than economic theory. These images, Marie Antoinette as the Austrian whore, corrupted by foreign cock, help justify her eventual execution as much as any political crime. You drift through the hall of mirrors, where whispers echo off gilded surfaces, each reflection multiplying the court's most persistent rumors about who's sleeping with their siblings. The Bourbon family tree looks less like a tree and more like a vine that's wrapped around itself so many times even the gardeners give up trying to untangle it. Louis XIV married his first cousin, his brother married his first cousin, and by the time you reach Louis XVI, calculating degrees of consanguinity requires advanced mathematics and a strong stomach. The Spanish marriages provide the most spectacular examples of keeping it in the family. You study the portrait of Charles II of Spain, the Bourbons' Spanish cousin, whose family tree is a straight line. His jaw juts out so far he can't chew, his tongue's too big for his mouth, and court physicians delicately note he's unable to perform husbandly duties despite 2 marriages. He's what happens when uncle fathers marry niece daughters for 8 generations. A walking advertisement, against royal inbreeding, who somehow rules an empire while drooling on state documents. You attend a court genealogist's presentation where he tries explaining why the Dauphin marrying his second cousin is actually progress. His chart requires color coding to track which bloodlines loop back on themselves, and he nervously jokes that at least she's not his niece like in the good old days. The audience of nobles nod approvingly while mentally calculating their own family tangles. One duchess boasts that her husband is only related to her through 3 different branches instead of the usual 5. As if genetic diversity is something that happens to other people. The medical consequences parade through Versailles like a genetics textbook's warning chapter. You count the Habsburg lips, the Bourbon noses that arrive before their owners, the tendency toward madness that everyone politely calls eccentricity. The royal nursery fills with children who die young from mysterious weaknesses that would be less mysterious if anyone admitted that mating with your relatives produces offspring with the genetic diversity of a sealed jar. Marie Antoinette's difficulties conceiving suddenly make sense when you realize she and Louis XVI share enough ancestors to populate a small town. But here's what historians still argue about: the sexual dysfunction that plagues these inbred aristocrats. Louis XVI's famous problem, consummating his marriage, might have less to do with phimosis and more to do with generations of cousins, creating more cousins. You read diplomatic reports describing royal bedding ceremonies where nothing happens despite audiences of witnesses, where brides and grooms stare at each other with the confused recognition of people who've been seeing variations of the same face at every family gathering since birth. The incest whispers grow louder around certain relationships that seem too close even for Versailles. Marie Antoinette's relationship with her brother, Emperor Joseph II, raises eyebrows when he visits and spends unusual amounts of time in her private chambers discussing Austrian interests. The Princesse de Lamballe's devotion to the Queen includes sharing beds, baths, and intimate correspondence that would make Sappho blush. Whether these relationships cross from emotional to physical remains the subject of heated academic debate, though the revolutionary pornographers don't bother with such distinctions, illustrating scenarios that make Game of Thrones look like a Disney movie. You intercept a messenger sweating through Versailles corridors, his leather pouch bulging with letters that could destroy marriages, topple ministers, and start at least 3 duels before dinner. The court's correspondence network operates like the internet's horny ancestor, where every sealed letter potentially contains state secrets, sexual propositions, or both, often in the same paragraph. The Duchess de Choiseul's morning mail includes a love sonnet from her music teacher, a blackmail threat from her former lover, and her husband's mistress asking to borrow jewelry, all delivered with the same ceremonial courtesy. The Cabinet Noir, France's official mail spying operation, employs a team of experts who steam open letters with more delicacy than surgeons. You watch them work in rooms above the postal station, carefully melting wax seals and memorizing noble signatures. They copy the juiciest contents into logs that the king reads for entertainment. Louis XV allegedly knew more about his courtiers' sex lives than their spouses did. One clerk specializes in decoding sexual euphemisms, maintaining a dictionary where attending to my gardens means pregnancy. Visiting the Swiss merchants indicates seeking abortion services, and discussing theology definitely doesn't mean discussing theology. You discover the underground letter writing industry that thrives in Versailles' shadows. Professional scribes offer services ranging from passionate but respectable to guaranteed to cause divorce. One elderly woman, who calls herself Madame de Plume, has ghost-written love letters for half the court, sometimes playing both sides of an affair. She shows you her files, organized by noble house, containing drafts of proposals, rejections, and reconciliations. I've written the same man's love letters to his wife and 3 mistresses, she cackles, using different handwriting but recycling the best metaphors. The postal system itself becomes a weapon of seduction and destruction. You learn about letter bombs, not explosives, but correspondence timed to arrive at maximally damaging moments. The Comte de Maurepas sends his wife's love letters from her music teacher to the teacher's wife during her birthday party. The Marquise de Maintenon floods her rival's husband with forged letters suggesting affairs with everyone from stable boys to the archbishop. These epistolary attacks require careful timing and often backfire spectacularly when the wrong person opens the wrong letter at the wrong moment. But here's where it gets truly modern: the birth of political pornography through intercepted letters. Revolutionary pamphleteers don't just make up scandals anymore, they publish actual correspondence between nobles, adding helpful illustrations for the illiterate. Marie Antoinette's letters to Fersen get reprinted with increasingly creative interpretations. A simple, "I long to see you," becomes a 4-page illustrated fantasy involving the entire Swedish diplomatic corps. The market for authentic royal correspondence grows so lucrative that forgers give up counterfeiting money to focus on fake love letters. You witness the panic when the revolutionaries seize the Royal Mail Depot, finding decades of correspondence that nobles thought they'd burned. Letters surface revealing affairs everyone suspected but couldn't prove. Financial arrangements that implicate half the aristocracy in embezzlement, and sexual preferences that make even revolutionary pornographers pause. The Marquis de Sade's personal correspondence, seized from the Bastille, has to be locked away because publishers refuse to print content that extreme, and these are people who illustrated Marie Antoinette with barnyard animals. The letters become evidence in trials, propaganda in pamphlets, and eventually historical documents that scholars still argue about, trying to determine which orgies actually happened and which were just aristocratic fantasy fiction. You stand in the Place de la Révolution on a cold January morning in 1793, watching how sexual scandal transforms into political weapon as the guillotine's blade waits for Marie Antoinette's neck. The crowd clutches pornographic pamphlets showing the queen in impossible positions, with everyone from Cardinal de Rohan to her own son. Images that helped convince them she deserves death, Revolutionary justice feeds on erotic propaganda. Turns out it's easier to execute a whore than a queen, so they made sure everyone saw her as the former. The trial transcripts read like a pornographic novel prosecuted by lawyers. You follow the prosecutor, Fouquier Tinville, as he presents evidence of the Queen's supposed sexual crimes, orgies that drained the treasury, affairs that compromised military secrets, and, most horrifically, accusations of incest with her 8-year-old son. The boy, coached and probably tortured, testifies that his mother and aunt touched him inappropriately, teaching him practices that damaged his health. Marie Antoinette's stunned silence speaks louder than any defense. But the damage is done. The image of her as an incestuous monster overrides any sympathy for a grieving mother. You trace how each royal mistress and libertine meets their fate. Their former sexual power transformed into revolutionary death sentences. Madame du Barry, Louis XV's last favorite, faces the scaffold screaming and begging, abandoning all aristocratic dignity. The crowd, used to stoic, noble deaths, grows uncomfortable. She's ruining the script where condemned aristos face death with courage. Her execution becomes a pornographic spectacle, as pamphlets describe her finally getting what she deserved in graphically violent terms that blur the line between sexual and capital punishment. The revolutionaries don't just execute bodies. They assassinate reputations with published secret histories that retail every rumor, every whispered scandal, every possible perversion. You collect these pamphlets, watching how the Princesse de Lamballe transforms from Marie Antoinette's friend into her tribade lover in increasingly explicit illustrations. When they kill her, the mob mutilates her body in specifically sexual ways, parading her severed head and genitals to the imprisoned queen's window. The pornographic imagination that once titillated now justifies murder. You witness the strange democratization of scandal as revolutionary leaders adopt the very vices they condemned. Danton keeps mistresses with the same enthusiasm as any duke, while Robespierre's supposed purity becomes its own perversion. He gets off on virtue like others get off on vice. The Palais Royal continues operating through the Terror, though now revolutionaries frequent the same brothels where they arrested aristocrats. The pornographic pamphlets simply change targets, from Marie Antoinette's alleged orgies to Madame Roland's supposed affairs. Different politics, same dirty minds. The revolution's final revenge comes through the archives, where centuries of royal sex scandals become public property. You watch gleeful sans-culottes reading aloud from seized letters, laughing at aristocratic perversions while planning their own. The Comte de Buffon's conquest ledgers become evidence at his trial, not for legal crimes, but for moral ones. Having sex with 1,789 women isn't illegal, but the Revolutionary Tribunal decides it should be. They execute him for corrupting the nation's morals, though half the jury probably wishes they had his success rate. As you reach the end of this sordid tour through French royal debauchery, you realize the ultimate irony. The revolutionaries who destroyed the monarchy for its sexual excess create their own erotic mythology just as perverted. The difference is they claim moral superiority while doing it. transforming France from a kingdom of acknowledged libertines into a republic of hypocritical ones. The guillotine falls on the last aristocratic neck, but the capacity for sexual scandal simply transfers to new management. Plus ça change, as the French say, plus c'est la même chose, especially in the bedroom. And now, dear listener, as our journey through the perfumed halls and blood-stained scaffolds comes to its close, let your breathing slow and your mind settle like silk sheets after a restless night. The echoes of scandal fade into whispers. The golden mirrors of Versailles dim to gentle shadows, and all those wiggling aristocrats in their ridiculous wigs drift away like figures in a half-remembered dream. You've survived the debauchery, witnessed the falls from grace, and emerged on the other side of history's most scandalous stories, safe in your own bed, where the only drama involves finding the cool side of the pillow. The ghosts of French courtiers return to their portraits, their secrets tucked back into dusty archives where scholars will debate them tomorrow. But tonight, they rest. Your eyelids grow heavy as the last candlelight flickers out in that great palace of dreams and schemes. The revolutionaries have had their revenge. The kings and queens have played their final acts, and you, wonderful, patient you, have listened to it all with the bemused detachment of someone born centuries too late to be implicated in any of it. Let the weight of your blanket replace the weight of history. Let your pillow cradle your head better than any crown, and know that while French courts may have perfected the art of scandal, you've perfected the art of listening to their stories without losing your head. Sweet dreams, dear listener, and may your sleep be more peaceful than any French monarch ever knew, untroubled by revolution, unmarred by poison, and free from anyone trying to document your private moments in leather-bound ledgers. The palace gates close softly behind you now, and you drift into slumber where the only courtiers are the gentle figures of your own dreams, and the only scandal is how wonderfully, deliciously comfortable you feel right now. Rest well, knowing that tomorrow's intrigues can wait, but tonight belongs to peace, to quiet, and to the blessed simplicity of a world where your biggest concern is nothing more than sleeping soundly until the morning light.